Hey, Phil. So in every situation except for our company, if your CFO is your friend, I feel like maybe your company is undefended. What do you think about that?
I think I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive, but I see where you're going with this. I'm gonna let you go there. I think that's not the primary goal.
Right.
But I don't think it's also, I don't think there's anything wrong with it either.
I'm obviously being a little cheeky here. I'm Josh Notes, across table from me. It's my business partner, friend, and co-host Phil Maffei. This is Financial Clarity Live, and we're diving in today to what makes a great CFO CEO relationship. They say it's a saying. I've heard it a lot. Uh, doing business with friends is a dangerous game. All sorts of versions of that. I think in business, it's really about how well you argue. Maybe that better than how well you get along. I know Phil and I have had some great arguments over the years. We might even have one right now on this show. I don't know. Um,
Stay tuned to find out. You
Pretty
never
soon
know.
to find out, but it's how you disagree and still find a way to respect each other. And I think if your primary goal is to keep your friendship as warm as possible, that's pretty difficult. But we're not in middle school. We actually didn't even know each other in middle school, but we do all go all the way back to college, and we ran businesses together since then over the last 20 years. And I think Phil's usually been in the CFO role. I've been in some version of CEO or operator role, and yet we're still here as friends. So, all right. I guess, Phil, regarding this topic of what makes a great CFO CEO relationship, what's the best ones you've seen and what would you define them with?
Yeah, I think, what you hit on is probably the most important thing is the ability to disagree and do it in a way that's productive, right? I think those out of those disagreements come the, really good conversations, right? You dig deeper and you try to figure out, um, you know, we lost a little connection there,
That's all right. Keep rolling, man. I think that's the local.
local connection. Okay. Lost my train of thought, but I think the idea that I was going for is that there's a need to play your role, right? It's like any good sports team where there's positions to be played. The goalie and the forward, they have different responsibilities and different things they need to be paying attention to so that the whole thing works, right? So I think in this particular example, it's two people who aren't afraid to speak what's on their mind to one another and have a healthy debate around wherever there are points of contention or disagreement.
Perfect. All right. So we're going to dive right in. Going to find like four different conversations you should be having every week with your CFO if you are the CEO. We're going to have 5 warning signs if your relationship's already broken. And we're going to talk about the rituals that compound trust without sacrificing truth. And, Phil's going to keep me honest as always. So if your CFO is your friend, right? Look, there is a level of comfort that comes, and numbers create a level of uncomfort. And so I think that's really what the topic and the friction is about, is that you can be really comfortable with your business partner, your CFO, but if you're so afraid of the comfort breaking down, then you may be sending signals if you're out there as the operator, owner, or executive, that you don't want to hear the truth. And I think that kind of starts to slip and fall into the next bullet here, which is the yes man drift, right? Where the relationship starts to go in a direction where whether the CFO can't, you know, find the strength and the spine to tell you no, or to tell you how they disagree, or make you rethink it or reshape it just because you spent a whole bunch of time on an idea, then that's pretty dangerous. Um, there's plenty of CEOs we've met that are super introspective and totally want to have that other opinion in the room, and there's plenty that really don't, and they just want to kind of hear their own voice, get validated and build me a spreadsheet that tells me what I'm thinking, and then we're going to go make it happen. I think, Phil, how do you frame this out as a way to protect yourself if you're out there listening, somebody's out there listening, they go, man, I I feel like I've been both of those versions of the CEO. How do they protect themselves from the worst version?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to fixing a problem is realizing you have one, right? So, I think to the point, the way you ask that question, you're already halfway there. If you realize that, you're here at all, you're always hearing the yes and a lot of no's, you can't possibly be that smart, right? And I think there's a lot of ego protection that goes on, right? And I think that's just human nature. But at the end of the day, I always go back to, if the role is to be the one who brings the objective data to the conversation, and you're grounding what you're saying in things that you can defend. It's your job to raise the flag and raise your hand when you see the need to, right? Or call bullshit when you smell it.
There you go. It's stanky. All right. So we're talking about tension and we're talking about respect. Um, I think there's also plenty to be said on the CFO side, right? There's plenty of CFOs who maybe it's a past trauma from some other organization that they got ran out of or that ran out of capital and they feel like it wasn't their fault. And so they kind of instinctively come to the table with their no shirt on, not no shirt, but the one that says no. I think, like you got to commit to your answer of whatever we're talking about, your side of the argument. And then you got to like frame it up and not be so willing to just get onto the other side of the argument. I think that's important, but you first have to have a room where that is welcomed and respected. I've built those rooms with teams and without a lot of whole capital in the room, and I've also seen them at a pretty large scale, not as large as you, Phil, but you've been in those larger rooms. And what do you see is important to keep both the productive tension and the respect in the room? How do they keep it in the room?
I mean, that had the pleasure to work for some really great folks that have done this at the highest of levels, and the best ones at it have always been able to build good teams around themselves. And the first place you start there is you put the pieces in place that support the weakest elements of what you do, right? So it's being able to see where the blind spots are, and then actively put people that you then let them do their jobs, and help you see those blind spots, right? So the best that I've seen have been able to do that in a way where everyone is rallied around whatever the mission is, right? And they play their role to accomplish it. And it's not always a democracy, right? There's a chain of command sometimes on the finance side of the house, but or most of the time, and more so even in the overarching organization, right? But they've always been the major voice in the room, and respected for it. And that was, I think, a lot to do with everyone felt like they were had a part in making the finance piece of things really hum, and be able to frame the conversation, right? You never build a plan deck without a couple slides with finances in there, right?
So, I think it starts, and we've been operating off of EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, for anybody out there that runs their similar small business environment that way, where the issues is the main point of the meeting, right? It's to getting to the friction, and everything else is really some form of update leading in that direction. And then you got to make sure you have time for that. I think there's plenty of folks who want it, but they're like, oh, not today. I don't want it today. So, if the meeting's an hour, they wait to bring up the topic till the 57th minute because they know they can get their side in, hear just enough, and the bell rings. There's folks who, maybe send it across in an email right before the meeting starts because knowing nobody's going to read it, and then they can say they said it, and they're really hoping to just rubber stamp their side of the story. But I like this last one. Lose sleep together. This is not marriage counseling, although being in a business together is pretty darn close to getting married. If you're not both worried about the same issues, you're definitely not on the same page. So I think there is a really important thing to have the main operator, integrator role, which in this case, in our relationship, Phil, CFO plays that versus the visionary kind of more out front role, and making sure we're on the same page. We have that meeting set. whether there's holidays or family issues or whatever, it pretty much occurs like clockwork. And I think that allows us to keep it productive, keep the tension in the right spot, and also respect the heck out of what each one of us is doing. So moving right along, here's how to kind of build this relationship, and think about how uh, these four things kind of fit together. If you don't have all four in the room, you maybe don't have a CFO as we consider it, right? So think about capital, people, customer, and kind of the future of the business. Phil, I want you to grab one of these and talk a little about how you've seen it built correctly from a CFO perspective, and yeah, maybe something else that's missing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last one is what, all of the other ones are predicated upon, right? Is if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't really make any difference what direction you go in, right? So being able to understand and articulate that vision, right? And then make all of the capital and people and, sales decisions with that end goal in mind. You're aiming at a target, right? And that's the first place to start from my view.
Sure. Yeah, you gotta keep the future state in mind, and then you got to kind of stay present in what's going on. And what we're saying is this is really a iterative process, probably occurring every week. I can't see a business where it would be occurring every day, although I'm maybe in manufacturing, like really rapid manufacturing. But you need this flow being thought of, and really these stakeholders, if you will, being considered in the conversation very consistently. And if you're not doing that and you're leaving one of these out, you're going to have a hole in your stakeholder model. And you might serve one stakeholder really well, but the other ones are probably going to suffer. And then ultimately the business will suffer because from everything I've seen, over time, the stakeholder model works. And over time, if you only focus on one stakeholder, it ends up caving somewhere along the way. All right. So this is something kind of not owned by us, but something that we really believe in, which is this distributed accountability method, which is the CFO is not the only one accountable for the numbers. They might be, in this case, in the pyramid at the top, but the owner, if they only are comfortable having this conversation about money or about numbers with the CFO, and it's a team larger than 2 or 3, you're going to have gaps downstream, and you're going to have decision-making bottlenecks that occur. Phil, can you talk about how you install the distributed accountability method, how long it takes in most organizations, and maybe what usually goes wrong when rolling it out?
Sure. I mean, the timelines, and that's all going to depend on the complexity of the organization. But the core of the philosophy, holds where the CFO isn't the one doing the operational things within the business, right? There's people responsible and playing all of their various roles, and if they don't have the financial perspective on that role, right, whether it's how much money they can spend or how much money they need to make, everyone's flying blind, right? So the idea that the owner of the business should be holding his team accountable to financial metrics and understanding what's going on at the operational level, and that's the finance team and the CFO's job to make sure everyone's on the same page, right? Everyone knows what the targets are, and the people responsible for doing the thing are the ones who are also responsible for owning those assumptions, and being the ones who are defending at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, right, what happened versus what everybody thought was going to happen. Where if it's just somebody in a room doing one of these versus everybody together and pulling together the picture, and making sure they're working toward the same vision, there's going to be two very different outcomes.
And borrowing a little bit from our buddy Jason with EOS, if 2 people are accountable for something, nobody's really accountable for it. I think, not to say that accountability can't be shared, but I think you want leadership around each one of these metrics. You'd like it to have a name associated with it, so that somebody is the one that feels ultimately responsible for bringing that metric in the direction that it needs to go for the organization to work. I think once that stops occurring, then it just kind of becomes noise and kind of paint, and it's like elementary school art class or something. Like everybody's getting an A because they all tried. So we're thinking that the CFO is going to multiply accountability as opposed to just absorb it all. And I think naturally, when what we've seen with our clients is a lot of them that shifted from kind of having no one in the finance seat, specifically the strategic finance seat, because they were wearing that all themselves. Well, now they shifted to the side one notch, and then they're like, okay, I'm good now. All of that sits with this one person, and why aren't we hitting this number, and why aren't we doing this? But there's 30, 40 other people that are making that happen, and if we don't get the numbers and the metrics driving the right direction by that group, ultimately, like, you're gonna have a pretty top heavy organization. So let's try not to do that. All right. Here is maybe the bad news of the session. So these are signs, if you've already recognized these, that you might already have a broken relationship with your leader of strategic finance. If you only hear bad news, or need a signature, right? So there's no good news, there's no conversation around growth. If the pushback has stopped, meaning that you no longer get challenged, especially if there's other people in the room. If you really can't talk about risk because there's really only one scenario playing out, which is the rosiest one. If you're bypassing another form of leadership, like a board or something like that, because you don't really want to have those conversations, or if if leading the witness, I guess, is what we've got bulleted here. But basically, if everything is kind of already being framed up in not so much of a debate or a discussion, but really like the answer is already there, you may have a dysfunctional CFO CEO relationship. Phil, pick one of these and maybe tell me why you disagree with it, or you have seen it installed well at another organization.
I mean, I think you'll know, right? I think it's one of those things where deep down inside you probably know that you're having your relationship isn't really working, right? So there's always the gut feeling that can't be ignored. Maybe that'll be the one that I add to this list.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll just add one more that we've seen a lot, because we've had a lot of relationships that kind of stem from the second generation owners of businesses, and they say something along the lines of, when we talk to them, and we're not yet hired, that the CFO was hired by their father, who no longer runs the business, but he, for whatever reasons, that person has to remain, or it would just be easier if they remained. I think that's a setup for ultimately not having success, because the relationship has this generational divide, and they feel like they were kind of handed this solution that isn't really providing. Okay. Well, here's some rituals on the good side that might compound trust. So having a weekly one-on-one between the operators at the executive level. You don't need to have a lot of structure per se. It's really making sure that everybody's on the same page. You've got to have a monthly, pre, and we would probably argue a postmortem of major decisions. This is effectively our forecasting, rolling forecasting methodology, with a operational meeting and a strategic meeting, and then talking about the scenarios of what could go wrong. Really discussing that is important to make sure everybody's view and perspective is being baked into these models. Having it on a quarterly basis where you can kind of observe what happened. This is maybe more in the rearview mirror, and really diving into what went wrong. What went wrong in the last quarter, getting to the root of it, and then resetting priorities around improving that. And then obviously, if we're kind of staying in this time-based ritual, then the last one would be, an annual one. A lot of organizations have some sort of successful retreat. The CFOs are not always involved in this, but maybe they're part of providing information in advance. Depends on their role and other things with the organization. And then I guess this standing open question of what am I not seeing to make sure that there's perspective in the room. Phil, what's a ritual that's missing from this, or one that you'd like to see organizations install?
Yeah, I think in the world, maybe I could maybe frame it around the way, that we operate, right? That, maybe there isn't the, weekly one-to-one or whatever it may be, but I think it's you know, coming coming ready to do things a little bit differently than you've always done them, right? So you're you're willing to kind of get a little bit more, I guess what's the word? A little bit more open-minded around, how the process needs to work, and kind of trust that, trust that you don't know everything, especially when it comes to the finance side of things, right? We have clients say
Mm.
to us all the time, where it's like, I'm not a finance person, I'm not a math person, all of that, all of those kind of, I guess, limiting beliefs, or maybe however truth they are. But I think wherever you fall on that spectrum, you know, finding somebody who, you can trust, and that, guess gets earned, right? Never necessarily taken for granted. So, I think that comes with, a good process, and kind of being able to create that rhythm of things, right? So whatever it winds up looking like, it's the consistency that's important.
Very well. And, I'll go ahead and say if this is something that your organization, you out there listening, says, I need help installing this, I don't even know where to start. Like, this is the opportunity for you to get some clarity. So go ahead and grab this QR code. It'll lead you to 15 questions. Takes about 3 minutes to fill out on the other end. If you are going and growing, you'll meet me for a 30-minute Zoom. I'll meet you where you're at. There's no cost involved in this. And we'll figure out together how we can help you get to the next level that takes your financial situation from foggy to clear. So, looking forward to that. Hope you take advantage. With that being said, here is the way that you can take your relationship and kind of audit it with whoever's leading finance in your organization. Do this Monday, and you won't be left next week wondering where you stand. Where did your CFO last surprise you? If you can't remember it, that's a good answer, but maybe not the one you're looking for. Pull your last 4 weekly meetings. Were they being canceled or shortened? If so, that might be folks trying to dodge the tough conversations. Name the top 3 strategic risks and ask your CFO to do the same. Compare the list without coaching. And then what would you change if you were, the CEO? That's kind of a question to the CFO, and then listen all the way through without responding. We think this is an opportunity for you to leverage your relationship and figure out where there might be gaps, and not wait until resentment builds up and yes men mentality sticks around for the long run. With that being said, Phil, give you the final word on this episode.
Yeah, I think it's, don't force it. All right, there's somebody for everybody, I guess, in this relationship is no different, right? So there's, I think there's a lot of, compatibility things, and soft skills that are important to, be able to work well with somebody, because at the end of the day, there needs to be a level of trust there, right? Because if that doesn't exist in the seat within which we sit, then what the hell's the point, right?
There you go. Well said, my friend. All right. If you guys out there listening enjoyed this, first, we want to say thank you for sticking around, picking up some nuggets, hopefully help you take your organization to the next level. If you'd like more, join our newsletter, Finance in Focus, for weekly financial tips, updates, and Q&A from this episode. And then, as always, we look forward to seeing you next week, 3 p.m. Eastern, for our next episode, where we're going to help you gain financial clarity live. Thanks.